Hello, students of St. Thomas Aquinas. This is Mr. Routet speaking to you from the internet. So today we're going to be looking at the CTF option for my class for the next 6 weeks. So first up, here's our schedule. So again, here's a heads up for which classroom you should be in following this presentation. So again, you can see that you should be in room 205 for my session, and then of course everyone else is up there as well. So again, don't forget to make your top 6 list for your favorites, because we're going to be looking at that later on to figure out where we're going to be putting everyone. So without further ado, my topic for CTF is going to be board games and tabletop games. So this will be a fun introduction into the world of tabletop gaming, and of course looking at making our own board games. So here we have 2 good images. Hopefully some of you have seen or heard of Catan before. It's a very classic board game. And then over there on the other picture we have just a little fantasy drawing of some people playing a fictional board game. So you guys will have the creative ability to make pretty much any type of board game that you see fit. Again, of course, we want to make sure that we're following along with appropriate things. So again, things that are too violent, or if we're using firearms, that type of thing, cannot be doing that. So we do have a few limitations, but for the most part, it's going to be a great time. So to get started with the process, first off we start off with research. So with research, we want to think about what kind of game do we want to create. So for this, we can work in groups if you wish, or you can work individually. Now of course, if you work in groups, you'll have a lot more time in the sense you'll be able to distribute tasks to one another. If you work individually, it'll be a little bit more of an undertaking, so you might not want to maybe make a huge game if that's the case. So with the research, we're going to be spending a couple of classes looking at information on different games. So a lot of you have probably heard of various games, but again, to expand our knowledge and to get some more input, we want to make sure that we're looking at different types of games. So some of you have probably heard of things such as Monopoly, chess. These are all classic tabletop games. There's also card games as well. So some of you might have heard of, for instance, Magic the Gathering. That's another very popular type of card game. So we also have strategy games such as Risk and the Game of Life. These ones also have different types of specific nuances to them that are different than your regular classic board game. So those games are typically a bit longer and they require a lot more thought to complete. So we want to think about too, what games inspire you. So what games are really at your core are going to be pushing you to make a really cool board game. So for instance, I provided a few examples. So Dungeons and Dragons for myself, I find that one quite fascinating, where you have a huge story behind the entire board game. And then of course we have Monopoly, which is looking at, again, society and economics. And then chess, which is something that's a little bit more simplistic, where you have specific roles for each little pawn on the board. So each specific character has their own movement. So you want to think about what's really going to drive you to make this game special. So that leads us into thinking about how are you going to play your game. So that's going to be a really big question that we're going to try and address. So that brings us into playability. So playability, we're thinking about the rules and kind of how far we can stretch the rules for the game that we're making. So for instance, you want to think about how are you going to win for your game. Do you have to get from point A to point B? Do you have to have a certain type of card combinations, like our image in the bottom right? Do you have to do a couple of sets of activities in a row to then get a prize? So you want to know how is it that you're winning the game. And you want to be able to tell, okay, who's winning at the game at a moment's notice. So our second point here, the limitations to your game, you want to think about how long is it going to take you to actually play a round of this game. And then how long does it last for? So do you want your game to go for maybe 20 minutes? Do you want it to go for 2 hours? Or do you want it to be like a Risk or Dungeons and Dragons type game where it lasts for a couple of hours to maybe a few days? So it's up to you to come up with exactly how long you want your game to be. Now, another really important part, what tactics or strategies can be used to win? So I'll give you guys some examples. If we look at chess up there, there's a couple of different strategies you can use, of course, for movement, for every single different character on the board. So if you're doing a movement-based board game, where you're just moving objects, again, you want to think of maybe some specific moves and types of plays that could be happening. Now you can also think about chance, so dice. So you can maybe utilize dice to throw a little bit of uncertainty into your game. So if we think about maybe Monopoly, you roll a set of 2 dice, well, a set of dice, which is just 2 dice, you roll them, and then you go a certain amount of distance on the board. Now that has a random element to it. So if you want your game to be a little bit more random, you can add in some things like that. So with strategies specifically as well, if we think about a game like Risk, that's a game where you have a world map, and then you're looking at conquering the entire world. So you want to think about, where do I want to start off on this place, and then how do I want to get from point A on the map to point B, and what kind of resources am I using to get from point A to point B. So with strategy, there's a lot of things we can think about, and there's a lot of things we can do with this. So this is going to be a huge part of the process, is thinking about exactly what we're going to be making, how we're going to be doing it, and what kind of things we can use to improve our game. So that's looking at playability. Now here comes the really exciting part, creation. So we're looking at figuring out what materials we need, gathering those together, making a really cool game with all these different reusable materials that we have available to us. So for instance, at school, we are limited to a certain amount of supplies at the moment. So we have cardboard, we have a lot of glue guns, we have paintbrushes, paint, some foam and styrofoam, paper, tools for miniature modeling. I was able to get some tools to utilize for this process. So things like tiny little sculpting tools and some specific paints made for smaller type of creation of little player models, things like that. So with this process too, you guys are going to be helping out one another and sharing some advice. So maybe somebody might have some really good ideas. We should be attentive and try and share our advice. So by sharing, we're going to be improving each other's board games. So a lot of this, we're going to be throwing ideas back and forth at one another. So I really want you guys to bring in some materials from at home too. So maybe you have a really nice piece of cardboard that you want to bring in for your board game. You can use that as the base of your board game for like the playing mat, and then you can do different designs and drawings on it to show your board and how maybe you move across it, or maybe what you place on it. You can also look at bringing in different things, like maybe if you want to make a game where you need scenery, you can bring in styrofoam, plastic bottles, and make some cool scenery for an environment for your game where your characters will be running around in. If you want to do your own custom dice, you could make some dice out of basic styrofoam. You could also use cardboard as well to make some dice as well. So you got a lot of options there. So you really want to think hard about what materials you want to bring in and how you want to use them in your game. Now you can see in the top right there we have a lot of different pieces to this game. So you want to make kind of a list of what kind of pieces will you need for your game. Do you need sheets to help explain the rules? And then of course, do you need dice in your game, or do you need a key element to move things around? So there's going to be a lot of thinking involved, but also a lot of fun. So that's the creation part. And now, of course, we have our final part of the process, which is playtesting. So again, just like looking at video games in beta stage and alpha stage, we're also looking at our board games as being in kind of an initial stage. So we're going to be playtesting them now and again. So we're going to be learning about each other's games and the rules and how to move about in our own tabletop and board game creations. So once we have our games to where we want them, we can look at maybe thinking about add-ons to our games. And what I mean by add-ons is changing things around or making things better for the next edition. So that's a really key part. Think about how you want to maybe improve your game for the future, or if you wanted to maybe publish your game later on, thinking about ideas like that. We want to make sure that it works well and that everybody has a fun time playing it. So the last part of my talk today, and again, thank you so much for paying attention, we have the careers that relate to this. So there's a lot of different careers, because again, with CTF, we want to make sure that it connects back to careers and possible job occupations for you in the future. So we're looking at, again, sculpture, graphic design, tabletop gaming expert, painter, artist, and inventor. So I'll mention just a couple of these real quick. So graphic design, again, all these neat little card art things that we see in this image up at the top right, that all has to be designed by someone. It takes a lot of work and it's a lot of fun as well to do. So if you're interested in something like that, graphic design would be kind of the area for you. There's also tabletop gaming expert, which is really interesting. Now with the ability of the internet to share information about games, we have a lot of people who specialize in playing tabletop games and sharing their knowledge of various games with others. So that's another cool job occupation. And then of course, inventor. We're inventing games today for this CTF. So thinking about what kind of game that we're looking at making, there's a lot of creative input and powerful thinking going on with this type of career. So I'll leave it at that for today. So I hope you are interested in taking this on as your CTF. And again, enjoy the rest of your day, and I will see you very soon. Bye, everyone.